Hi, welcome to Ask a Stoic. Today's question is, do Stoics believe in an afterlife? Now, as we talked about in previous videos, when we talk about Stoics and Stoicism, we're casting a pretty wide net. There's a push today to maintain a big tent Stoicism, so there's going to be a wide variety of ideas on this issue. Classically, the short answer is no, not really. There's often this disjunction that Marcus posits providence or atoms, and that has sort of theological and practical consequences for how Stoics would have thought about those issues. There is evidence that there is something called ekpyrosis, which is part of the Stoic cosmology. So within Stoicism, the cosmos is all of existence surrounded by a great void. And periodically, in a series of cycles, this material expands to the point, and then there is a giant cosmic fire which consumes everything, and the process starts over again. It sounds actually kind of similar to Big Bang, Big Crunch. People who are proponents of heat death cosmology will probably take issue with that. But to me it seems like a pretty interesting poetic and romantic description of what was a current modern theory of cosmology. So the question is, do Stoics believe in an afterlife? Generally the idea was that the little bit of us that we might call soul or spirit or pneuma doesn't necessarily live on in a way that someone from an Abrahamic background would recognize. There is suggestions that the soul of the sage does live on after death, but not past ekpyrosis. So it may live on for a while, but it's not an eternal life. All things which are pneumatic, which contain high densities and tension of pneuma, return to that source. So sometimes you'll see something described as like the world soul, which sounds a little bit wishy-washy and new agey. But the idea is that since there is this mixing of matter and, let's say, spirit, pneuma, these aren't really two separate things. They're single versions of an entity. The Stoics were monists, but it's more right to call them vitalists. They believed that there was a living force which penetrated and co-located with all matter, and different tensions of this is what provided different sort of levels of life and cognition. So the soul is a particular tension of pneuma, and it likely does, according to the traditional theory, does not live on after death. But Marcus gives us a reminder that whether providence or atoms, whether the soul lives on or not, whether there's an afterlife, whether the gods take a personal interest in our life, a disproportional interest, or they don't exist at all, doesn't materially affect how we live our lives ethically, how we live our lives as social creatures, how we fulfill our social roles. That if they're gods and they are just, they will be so. If not, then there aren't. That if it's to the greater good, there will be an afterlife. If it is not to the greater good, then there won't. But neither of these things are up to us, and neither of them should define and dictate how we spend our time here. So the reason that we act with virtue, the reason that we pay attention to how we behave, is not for fear of eternal punishment or fear of reward, but it's because it's a core part of what we are as humans. And as long as we are expressing our humanness excellently, we will be behaving ethically and virtuously. So whether there's an afterlife or not doesn't practically matter. It might be more or less comforting for certain things, but we still have this threat of death anyway, memento mori. We still have this thing to which we have to measure. Our time here is limited, regardless of whether there's something comes after, and we need to spend that time well, ethically, morally, and searching out virtue. So in some ways, it's a question that shouldn't matter overly much to practicing modern Stoics. Now, it might have an interesting debate for people who are more academically oriented, but that's not something that we as practitioners really is going to inform our practice over much. So, providence or atoms, afterlife or not, it's just not up to us. Hope that clarifies the issue, and fate permitting, I'll talk to you next time. And don't forget, you can submit your own questions in the comments below, or at mountainstoic.wordpress.com. Click Ask a Stoic on the left and fill out the form and submit your own questions. Thanks.